You're listening to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. Just a quick heads up before we get started with this episode, I wanted to let you know about a free resource for listeners of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. That means you. If you are planning your next trip abroad, or if you're just getting back out into the world again, maybe you're going to an event or to a festival or to a meetup, that you need to be prepared for what to say when you meet someone for the first time. Download our free Spanish conversation guide so that you'll be prepared to have a conversation with anyone that you meet for the first time in Spanish. We give you a list of the most common questions that you'll be asked and that you may want to ask someone when you meet them for the first time, along with the responses so that you can be prepared when you have that conversation in less than 30 minutes. So to get your free conversation guide, just go to SpanishConversationGuide.com. Simple, right? SpanishConversationGuide.com to download your quick guide to prep for your first Spanish conversation. Now, did you know that there are actually two different ways to say to know in Spanish? And each of those two different verbs also happen to be irregular verbs. I know it already sounds super complicated, but not to worry. I've got you covered with this episode of the podcast. We're going to talk all about the two different ways to say to know in Spanish. And I'll also be breaking down for you the differences in how to actually form these verbs because they are irregular, but they're also very, very common. So it's super important that you get this one down. So as always, we will be doing that con música. So we're going to be using some Latin music to do this breakdown so that you really understand the right way to say to know and in which situations you would use each verb. Entonces, vamos a empezar. Let's get started.
Bienvenidos! Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast, the show for Spanish learners that love music, travel, and culture. Close your grammar textbooks, shut down the language apps, and open your ears to how Spanish is spoken in the real world. Let us show you how to go from beginner to bilingual. Here is your host, certified language coach, Tamara Marie.
Hola, bienvenidos al episodio 145. Welcome to episode 145 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. Before we get started with this week's episode, I just want to send out a warm welcome to all of the new members of the Spanish Fluency Club who just signed up with us over the past week. Super excited to get started with everyone. We're actually having an orientation session today. So again, welcome, bienvenidos, and I look forward to helping you really meet your goals to speak Spanish fluently this year. Now, for everyone else who may have missed that, if you're interested in signing up for the future, we will be opening back up for new members probably sometime in the spring or summer. And if you want to be the first one to know about that, just go to SpanishConSalsa.com/join, and you can actually sign up for our wait list there and get more information about the Fluency Club. So now let's get to the topic of this episode because I know this is one that can be super confusing, especially if you're just getting started with Spanish, or maybe you've been learning for a little while, but you really just don't know the difference between these two main verbs that are used to say to know, right? Because in English, we really only have this one verb. And in Spanish, there are two different ways to say pretty much the same thing. So I will be breaking down the difference between those two verbs. And of course, as always, we'll do that with some songs. So I'll give you some examples from some song lyrics. And I'm hoping from that, you'll be able to notice the pattern on your own without me having to explain it to you. But rest assured, by the end of this episode, I hope I'll clear up any doubt you have if you're not picking it up from the song lyrics, okay? So first, let's talk about what are these two verbs and how do we form them, right? How do we say them? And generally, we start out talking about the present tense because, again, that's really one of the more common ways that you'll hear these verbs. So that's all we're going to cover in this episode. Of course, you can always go, dive deeper into these and learn more about how to conjugate them. But the two verbs in Spanish that both translate into English as to know are saber y conocer. So saber y conocer. And like I said, in English, we would probably translate them both into to know, right? So let's talk about how to form these verbs first. So in the present tense, both saber and conocer are irregular in the first person. So in the yo form, so when I'm talking about I or me, something that I am doing, they're both irregular. So I'll save that one for last. So let's go through the easy part first, right? So saber is a regular verb in all other tenses. And if you're familiar with a little bit of Spanish grammar, you'll know that saber is a verb that ends in er, as we would say in English, or er. And there's a pretty basic way to conjugate a verb like that, right? So I'll just go over it briefly. So for saber, we would drop off that r and we would replace it for the subject pronoun. So for tú, it would be tú sabes, or you know. Ella sabe, she knows. Nosotros sabemos, we know. Ellos saben, they know. Right? So that's pretty much how you would conjugate the verb saber in the present tense. Tú sabes, ella sabe, nosotros sabemos, y ellos saben. Now for conocer, once again, this verb is also a regular verb in for every other subject pronoun except for the I or the yo form. So conocer also ends in er, so it'll be very similar to how we conjugated saber. So tú conoces, él conoce, nosotros conocemos, ellas conocen. All right, so again, very simple, straightforward there. Both of those are pretty easy in all of the other tenses, so they pretty much follow the same pattern. So that's the easy part of this, so that's great. So we got that out of the way. Now, in the first person, both saber and conocer are irregular. So for the first person of for saber, it would be yo sé. Yo sé. And that's actually spelled S-E or S-E con un acento sobre la E. So it has an accent over the letter E. And it really doesn't change the pronunciation in this course. It's just to differentiate it from the other se, which is used in a lot of other ways. We won't get into that in this episode. But just know that when you see se with the accent, that it's the verb saber and it's the first person. So this is probably really common. This is one of the first things you learn, right, in Spanish. If someone asks you a question, you say, I don't know, yo no sé. Or you can say, no lo sé,